that are used in this section, and it gets a little bit it gets a little bit confusing sometimes. Another thing that gets a little confusing is the politics. We see in the power, this whole section sort of begins with a high-ranking military figure named Claudius Lysias, most of the time simply described as the commander. We know that he's a high-ranking official because centurions report to him. Centurions are over groups of 100. And so I'm suspecting that that this commander is probably something along the lines of, in our army today, maybe something along the lines of a major or possibly a colonel. It could be even that he would be of the rank of a general, because he has, it seems that he has considerable authority. Claudius Lysias eventually sends him up the chain of authority to the governor. As I say, it does get a little confusing because there are positions of power, there are various ranks, and then there are politics, and then all of these people lie.
Brother JB, this Claudius Lysias is the commander of St. Paul. That's his name?
Yes. He's Claudius Lysias, and we don't know that. He's referred to over the course of many verses simply as the commander. Only when he writes a letter to the governor does he identify himself by name, Claudius Lysias. Now, later on, we see the government officials refer to him by name. But for 2 chapters, he's simply referred to as the commander. And as I say, we've never, as far as I know, we've never in the New Testament ever encountered that military rank before. Typically, for example, in the crucifixion of Jesus, we see centurion. Now, I'm supposing a centurion to be something like our master sergeant. Now, he's a sort of probably a non-commissioned officer, but this is a much higher rank. And as I say, it's got to be somewhere between our major and perhaps a general. And I lean more towards that colonel general side because he seems to have considerable authority. He is able to demand the convening of the Sanhedrin court. He's able to, any Jewish soldier would have been able to, with authority, push around, to a certain extent, a Jew. But he's able to push around, the commander's able to push around the supreme ruler. The guy with the real power is the high priest. Now the guy with sort of the face is the king. But the real power in the organization has always come from the high priest. But even at the level of the commander, he's able to tell the high priest what's what, who's who, and how things are going to go. He takes and moves Paul up the chain to the governor, who is at this point Felix. It's a little confusing because later Felix, his term of office expires and he's replaced by a fellow named Porcius Festus. Simply the names beginning with the same first letter, Felix and Festus, can get a little bit confusing sometimes.
I wonder how long it took from this to that. How long?
Well, he was in custody. He was in Felix's custody at least 2 years. We're told 2 years, but there was obviously some time before that. So this is a period of a minimum of 2 years, 2.5 years, I would think, before we see Felix come on the scene.
We didn't see that part, but he's taken out of Jerusalem to another
Taken
city.
Caesarea. Yeah. Now the high priest continually wants him brought back to Jerusalem, but it wasn't. It wasn't for a legitimate purpose. Each of the times that they want him moved, it's for the purpose of assassinating him during prisoner transport, which is the reason that Claudius Lysias sends him to the governor to start with. The intention was there was a group of 40 Jews who had taken a vow. I wonder how that worked out for him. We will not eat or drink until he's dead. Well, he's still alive 2.5 years later, which means those 40 should have starved to death a long time ago. But the reason for the move from Claudius' custody to the governor is because of a plot of the Jews to kill him. Remember, the unknown son of Paul's sister. We don't know who the sister is. We don't know who the son is. But it's the son, the nephew, who finds out about this plot, goes and reports it to Paul in prison. Paul reports it to the centurion. The centurion then takes it to the commander. The commander then interviews the nephew, Paul's nephew himself, and based upon that report, says, don't tell anybody. That very night sends him under armed guard overnight, which is an extraordinary thing. Remember, they didn't have headlights. They didn't have street lights. They're traveling through territory that's fairly dangerous in the daytime. But he transports the prisoner during the course of the middle of the night. And the reason is because of the plan of the Jews to assassinate him. Now, later they want Felix to send him back, but the reason to send him back is because they had planned to kill him. Once again, it was to be an ambush along the way. So we continually see the Jews do not want to hold him in trial; they want to assassinate him.
I like the letter that he wrote because the main part is there. I found that the accusation had to do with questions about their law. But there was no charge against him that deserved death or imprisonment.
Well, we see later, after Felix has moved on, Festus has taken possession of him. He gives the same report. He said, when they brought him before me, they did not bring the kind of charges that I expected, but points of contention within their own religion. Now, what Paul has done is way back when, in the sort of preliminary hearing, where the Sanhedrin has been called together at the request of Claudius Lysias, the commander. Paul recognizes I've got both Pharisees and Sadducees here, and he declares all of this to be about his belief and declaration in the resurrection of the dead. Now, specifically, and this is pointed out by both Felix and Festus, it's the resurrection of the dead man, Jesus of Nazareth. All of this, they're confused. All of this is about a man who is dead that he says is alive. And so that's what Paul brought all of this down to. And guess what? The Romans couldn't care less one way or the other.
What the Pharisees and everything, when Jesus was, when he rose, the Pharisees said, made up a story that his body was stolen. So in the long term, they're probably trying to hide this, that they made up the story too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because if they did this, then they're guilty of more or less a lie or stealing a body.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly right. If there had been, the thing that always surprises me a little bit is there's no, Paul has fairly shrewdly, from the Gentile, the Roman perspective, he's shrewdly brought this down to a point of religious disagreement. The Pharisees believe in the resurrection of the dead. The Sadducees do not. Paul is honing this down even more specifically, not a matter of, in general, we believe in the resurrection of the dead, but generically. But Paul is saying specifically the person, Jesus of Nazareth, he was dead and now he is alive. Now, the only reason why the Romans should have cared about that, but now someone would have said, present me the body. The only reason they would have cared about that was, remember, the only charge that ultimately they could make against Jesus was that he declared himself to be King of the Jews. And that was the charge that was put on the placard that was above his head on the cross. If he were a threat to Caesar. Now, no one makes that claim anymore because Jesus has not presented himself to the public at large.
On chapter 21 is when Paul arrived to Jerusalem, and the problem was that they were saying that he was teaching against the law, that the Jewish didn't have to circumcise no more, and that was the problem. Then he goes to the temple and do what they have to do, and now the accusation is different. When Paul said in chapter 23, it's not about anymore about what he was accusing him first, about the law. Now he say, I stand here on trial because my hope in the resurrection of the dead.
Well, remember, the initial charge that they brought against him was that he had defiled the temple by bringing a Greek into the temple. Triumphus, they had seen him with a man named Triumphus in the city earlier in the week. Triumphus was not with him in the temple, and so he wasn't guilty of having defiled the temple. And I've pointed out to you quite plainly my feeling that Paul sort of took the easy way out with this business of taking a vow and having his head shaved and going through the purification. All of this is nonsense. But he did all of these things because James and the elders, the council, said, look, do these things to show that you are one of us. You haven't been out in the faraway provinces with the Gentiles so long that you've renounced being a Jew. Just sort of go along with us, and all of these things should go away. Now, and I thought, why did you do that? There was you knew better. You knew that was the former way, and since the crucifixion of Christ, that none of that matters anymore. But he did them. Now you notice over and over and over, he points back to that says, not only did I not cause trouble, I didn't create any arguments. I was in the temple, I was in the synagogue, I wasn't inciting. But as a matter of fact, I had gone through all of the rituals. I had been purified. I was just being a good Jew. So he uses that. Now, Romans 8:28 says that God uses all things together for the benefit of those who love him. Well, here's something that I think was not only unnecessary, and I think it was inadvisable, that has turned out to be part of Paul's defense. I was not only in the temple, not only was I not causing trouble, but I had followed all of the rules. I was there purified. Not only had I not defiled the temple, but I had gone through a 7-day, almost 7-day. It was on the 7th day that he got arrested, I believe. I'd gone through a 7-day purification ritual process. So, you never know. All of the things, the little decisions that we make in the course of the day, maybe they're necessary, maybe they're not, maybe they're advisable, maybe they're not. God can still use them. And so this whole process, which to me seemed like he was taking the easy way out, eventually becomes a significant part of his defense against his Jewish detractors. Not only am I not guilty of the things they've accused me of, check for yourself. I followed all of the rules. I had just gone through a 7-day purification. Now he's looking backwards now 2 years ago, because he's been in custody. By the time Felix comes along, he's been in custody more than 2 years. So this is a very long process for a guy who even yet doesn't have any charges against him. Our video ends today with him going before King Agrippa and Bernice, hoping that the governor can come up with something that he can write down to why I'm sending you. He says, I think it's advisable, if I'm going to send a prisoner to the emperor to be for an appeal, there should be a charge against him. He hasn't been convicted of anything. He hasn't even been charged yet with anything. Not that's chargeable, not that the Romans care about. The resurrection, not resurrection. Felix don't care. Festus doesn't care. Claudius Lysias. That's the individual components of your religion, not my religion. And so, he's saying, why are we here? Now, here's a point where you can debate it. You're at this point where he's called in, he the governor, Festus has called in Agrippa to hear, hoping he can get a charge, because he says, I don't have nothing wrong. I don't see anything. I would have let him go, but he appealed to Caesar. Gee, if you let him go, now there's nothing to appeal. And did he really feel that way, or now is he just saying that to make himself look good? I don't know. As I say, one of the problems here is you have professional politicians who lie just to make them look good, and they say whatever it is that they need to say, depending on who it is that they're saying it to. See an interesting little shift. The king and queen, I guess Bernice would be the queen, come to see the governor to pay respects to him. So they recognize that he is a representative of the superior government. And yet then you see the next day, old King Agrippa, and then now you see him sitting, he's coming in with great pomp and ceremony. An entourage comes with him. He is seated on a throne, and the governor is sitting as though he were a prosecuting attorney in a court. So you see the politicians just playing off of each other's ego. They know who is actually in charge, but they pretend for each other's benefit. When it comes right down to it, Herod is under the authority of the Roman governor.
There's something about chapter 23 also. In 24, he said, after several days later, Felix came with his wife Drusilla, who was a Jewess. She was Jewish, his wife, and sent for Paul and listened to him as he spoke about the faith in Jesus Christ.
Another interesting thing with that is, and this may be because of Drusilla and her being Jewish. Verse 23 says, when Felix heard these things, having more accurate knowledge of the way. Yeah. So he was acquainted with Christianity. He was acquainted with Christians. We don't know why, except that they do further identify his wife, Drusilla, as being a Jew.
Jewish, yeah.
They don't really say that she's a Christian, but how would he have had a more accurate knowledge of the way? We don't really know that.
But you know how many years have passed already from the death of Jesus Christ.
Oh, this is
And it's
a long time.
25 years.
Yeah, long
Close
time.
25 years, and everybody have heard about the Christianity,
Verse 17 says, "Now, after many years, I came to bring alms and offerings to the nations." So yeah, this is that from the death of Christ, from the conversion of Paul on the road to Damascus, from his beginning his work as an evangelist and mission, many years have passed.
Yes,
And we're saying, this is why I was in Jerusalem to start with. I was doing a good thing.
exactly.
And part A, I'm there not to cause trouble, not to have arguments, not to create riots or contention or rebellion. I was there to bring a love offering to those in need. So I'm there because of good things. And B, while I'm there, I follow the rules. I go through I made a vow. I had my head shaved. I've gone through a purification process. I presented myself to Why am I being picked on? Why? Because I believe not only generally in the resurrection of the dead, but specifically that Jesus of Nazareth has been raised from the dead. So he brings it down to the person of Jesus.
Brother JD, okay. He said on 24:27 that he stayed there 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
That means after he left Jerusalem, he's taken to Caesarea and stayed there 2 more years on that place with no charges.
Well, no charge. He's not.
But this
Not only is he not guilty of anything, he hasn't been charged. Now he's charged by he's charged by the Jews, but not by the Romans.
But he's allowed to have visitors in Caesarea. And
Another a little sort of social bit of information. If you're in prison, if you're in jail, you'd better have friends and family. You better have people to take care of you, or you did without. 23 said he commanded the centurion to keep Paul and to let him have liberty, and told him not to forbid any of his friends to provide for or visit him. So you want food, clothes, a blanket, pillow, shoes, you'd better have friends and family.
exactly. And I think this, like you said, it has to be because of his wife being Jewish. He had more compassion to Paul.
Now, there's something here, verse 24. After some days, when Felix came with his wife Drusilla, who was Jewish, he sent for Paul and heard him concerning the faith in Christ. He has a more accurate understanding of the way. Here he wants more specific, so he's encouraging Paul to teach, preach, explain to him. He hears him concerning the faith. Now, here's where trouble comes in. Verse 25, now as he reasoned about righteousness, self-control, and the judgment to come, Felix was afraid. This is what we, in using church language, refer to as the convicting power of the Holy Spirit. This is that Isaiah moment where he comes to a realization of, woe is me, for I am unclean. A man who lives among unclean people. Now, this is the moment of salvation where, if it's never happened before, we don't know if it's ever afforded to him again, but here's the moment of salvation. The Holy Spirit has convicted him of righteousness, of self-control, and of the judgment to come. And Felix was afraid, which is proper. But here's the response. Go away. When I have a convenient time, I will call for you. Now, he was speaking to the person of Paul, but in the greater context, he was speaking to the person of the Holy Spirit. Go away. You're making me feel bad. I will be saved at a time when it's more convenient for me. I'll be saved at the point in my career when I've achieved the success that I'm looking for. I will call upon you at the time in my life when my marriage is established and settled, when my children have grown and are out of school, when I've provided the financial resources that I need for my old age. I'll call upon you when I have sown my wild oats, when I've already had my fun, when I've already experienced life. But here's the thing. We have no indication that Felix ever accepted.
But he said that on 26 that he frequently was sending for him to talk to him.
Well, but now there's a little more to that story. He frequently called two things.
He was hoping that he can.
He was hoping he would give him a bribe and that all of this would go away.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, I have discovered that there are people who are in church because they just like being in church. Most church people, not all of them, are fairly nice people. You can trust most of them. Most of them are sort of good citizens, good Boy Scouts, good Girl Scouts sort of people. They're the kind of people that are nice to have as next door neighbors. You enjoy the music. They have social programs. There are things for the kids. There are subgroups that sometimes there's cooking classes in bigger churches. There's social things where you go, little groups of people go out to eat. To folks like that, they enjoy being around church people. But don't get into my personal business. It makes me feel bad, and I'd rather talk about that at a more convenient time. But generally, if the preacher doesn't get in too personal, I like being in church. And so there could be a couple of. One of the things we are specifically told that he's hoping that by these frequent visitations, Paul will just get enough, offer him some money, and all of this will go away. But the other thing is, it may be that because he was already well acquainted with the way, and because perhaps of Drusilla, his wife, being a Jewess, he's interested, he's curious, he's intellectually stimulated by the debate, by the challenge. As long as you can keep it on an intellectual and educational level, and don't let it get to when it gets to a personal level, the Holy Spirit convicted him and he became afraid. It says to go away, but he kept calling him back again. So we don't know. There was a lot of. Most things in life are not all one thing or all of another. There's many layers of what's going on with Felix. He can never get. If what I kind of suspect is right, that Drusilla may be a Christian or she may have Christians in her family, he can't just get away from it. And so it may be that on the one hand, from his Roman, his mercenary side, if we can talk, maybe all of this can go away. But on the other hand, in the meantime, you're a really interesting fellow to talk to. The fact that he was a prisoner doesn't take away from this as a highly educated man. He's someone that the governor can talk to. Sometimes it's simply nice to be able to make connection with someone of your own age, someone that shares somewhat a common background, someone that has some things in common with, and it's very likely that the governor finds these things in Paul. He's someone who has as much education as the governor does or more, and he's someone that he apparently enjoys talking to because he sends for him over and over and over and over again over the course of 2 years. At the end of his term, he is what he is. He is a hard-nosed, hard-lined mercenary. Look out for number one. he should have released Paul at the end of his term of office, when he's either being recalled back to Rome in an administrative position within the emperor's office, or he may be transferred to another governorship, another region, being promoted to a higher, a more desired. This area was not. And if you remember back with Pontius Pilate, he's enduring this time. This is not the dream job. This is the entry level. I want to get into management, and if I've got to go here, then I do it. I tell this to the young people at Enterprise all the time. You're being sent to a losing branch, a troublesome branch, a branch that has very, very low customer relationship level. Take it, because you got nowhere to go but up. But it gets you in the door. You get promoted into management, and then when the opening comes, you can, they call it throwing for. You can throw for the better branch. You can throw for the more profitable branch, the one that's in a better neighborhood, the one that's closer to where you live. This is what Judea is for these Roman governors. This is not their dream job. They just have to serve their time out. Felix did, but he should have let him go. But to do a favor to the Jews, I'll just leave you right in prison. And now we see the new guy who comes in, who basically says, I really don't want to inherit Felix's problems. Let's get rid of this. I'm new. I'm going to be here for several years. Get this out of here. This has already been hanging out for 2 years. And so you see Festus immediately convening court and having a hearing.
Brother JD, at this time, this is probably year 62 when Felix left Paul in jail. There's no persecution yet for the Christian people. It's calm, or the persecution it was just after Jesus Christ, when Paul was persecuting Christianity.
If you remember back at the beginning of 24, Ananias the high priest came down with the elders and a certain orator named Tertullius, a lawyer. When he was called upon, this is chapter 24, verse 2, Tertullius began his accusation saying, seeing that though through you we enjoy great peace and prosperity, we've had reforms that have been made. Yeah, this is a period where it's relatively calm. And of course the lawyer is flattering the governor. Through you, we've had many years of peace, prosperity, and reforms for our nation, to which we are grateful. And then, of course, when we see Paul recognizing you have been judge over us for a number of years. Paul says in verse 10, chapter 24, after the governor had nodded to him to speak, answered, inasmuch as I know that you have been for many years a judge of this nation, I do the more cheerfully answer for myself. Paul doesn't declare to him have been a good judge or a righteous judge or a judge over a peaceful period or a prosperous. He simply acknowledges his authority. The government's lawyer says, oh, judge, through you we've had a period of calm, peace, and prosperity. Paul simply acknowledges the fact you're the judge. And I recognize your authority and cheerfully now stand before you and make my defense. So yeah, this is a period apparently where there's not a lot of, at least in this area, there's not a lot of persecution. Now there has previously been persecution, which is what dispersed the Jews to start with. But they seem to have gone through peaks and valleys.
Yeah, there was some years after, like around year 35 probably, after the death of Jesus Christ. Year 23, then.
Well, keep in mind too, Paul freely acknowledges that not only was there persecution, but he says, I was part of it. I went from house to house dragging men and women and children and imprisoned them. And when it come time to put them to death, I voted in favor of it. And in fact, I stood guard over the clothing of the executioners of Stephen. He repeatedly, over and over, acknowledges not only that persecution, but that he was one of the persecutors. But then there seems to be a period where it dies down and there's less of it. Then it comes back and then it dies down again. You know, ultimately, Constantine, the Roman emperor, accepts Christianity, makes it the state religion. We see essentially the formation of the Catholic Church, the universal church, by the declaration of Constantine, where there is no more persecution.
But-
Persecution eventually is replaced with prejudice.
And then, okay, we have this year 35 probably when the persecution came and they have to go through different. But as we travel with Paul, we don't see persecution on the places where he's going. Where he's going, he's preaching. We don't see the people being killed.
It's generally personal when we see Paul travel. They're not after the Jews, they're after him. In fact, it's generally the Jews that's after him. He don't have much trouble with the Gentiles. He didn't have trouble with the Greeks. He didn't have trouble with the Macedonians, it's always the Jews in those locations.
And then that means the persecution was always in Jerusalem, in that area for the Christians there.
Well, it probably was centered there, but remember Emperor Nero, who took Christians and tied them to fence posts and lit them on fire. Now, there was intense persecution everywhere under Nero. Now, this is taking place under Emperor Augustus.
What year was Nero then?
Nero, if I'm remembering right, Nero would have been around AD 60.
Was he around when the destruction of the temple in 80?
That's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking Nero is around in that area.
Because we're getting close to the year 70.
Yeah.
But the year 70 was for all the Jewish, not only Christianity. There was destruction of Jerusalem.
Somebody grab your, Google Emperor Nero. We have the answer to every question available at our fingertips, and we forget to use it sometimes. From one Roman emperor to another, we see periods of intense persecution, periods of indifference, and periods where there's no.
Remember that the Jewish are not fled yet.
54. I'm so sorry.
54.
68.
68.
What was it?
54 to 68.
Well, that's what I thought he was. I said 80, 60. I thought he was governor in about 80, 60. So yeah, he would have been governor during that time. Which means he would have been. It means he was probably the emperor immediately following this one.
54, 68 AD.
I would suppose Augustus must be immediately before him, because Augustus is listed as the emperor here. I don't remember exactly right. 25 verse 21, when Paul appealed to be reserved for the decision of Augustus, I commanded him to be kept till I could send him to Caesar. So probably Augustus is the emperor immediately preceding Nero. Under Augustus, there does not seem to be a great persecution that takes place. It is intense under Nero. I mean, his wickedness is unsurpassed. He blames the fire, the burning of Rome, on the Christians.
And it's so strange, because there were not too many Christians already.
There weren't too many, and of course after him, there weren't too many left. He killed them, most of them. The Christians were thrown with the gladiators and fed to wild animals.
Paul still had not been able to go there yet.
No. Well, Paul is going to be going to a relatively indifferent. I don't think, we don't see that Augustus is a pro-Christian. He's just relatively indifferent. He's the typical attitude towards most of the Romans towards the Jews. Who cares? Your little bitty backwater hick town piece of our empire that we don't. As long as you don't cause trouble, we don't care. You want to practice the religion, fine. Don't involve us in it. And that's the attitude that we see over and over and over, going all the way back to Pontius Pilate. He kept saying, I don't see a Roman law issue here. This is to do with your own, you deal with it. Going back with Jesus. They're telling the Jew, and the Jews would then say, we want to put him to death, but we don't have the authority. That's why we're here. Only you, the superior government, has the authority to execute. Governor Pilate's problem was, but I don't see that he did nothing. He didn't do anything as far as Jews are. So they made the claim he's a king in opposition to Caesar. Now here, no one's made that claim because Jesus is not publicly showing himself. Now, at the very beginning of this sequence, Jesus shows himself to Paul while he's still in Lysias. I think he's still in Lysias Claudius. He comes to him in the middle of the night, stands beside him while he's sleeping and says, look, you're going to be going to Rome. Now, another thing, if Felix was sincere and found nothing wrong with him and had no intention of proceeding, there was no reason for Paul to have appealed when he was about to be released. But we don't know that was number one. That's what Felix said to King Agrippa. That's not necessarily what he said to Paul. There's no indication that he was telling Paul that, look, I don't find anything wrong. I'm fixing to let you go. Because you wouldn't appeal your case if you were winning.
The thing is, like, through books and movies, and they put this in your mind that there were persecution the whole time, and then when you really read, it's not what they show us,
No, there's not persecution the whole time.
And I think the bad part it was when what the Romans did to the Jewish people, they killing them and destroying them, but they did it in general, Jewish and Christians and
I love the sort of closing scene that we have here. Paul is standing before Festus. And Festus is at the point where he can't find anything wrong with him. Paul giving his defense. It says, neither against the law of the Jews, nor against the temple, nor against Caesar have I offended in anything at all. But Festus, wanting to do the Jews a favor, answered Paul and said, are you willing to go to Jerusalem and there be judged before me concerning? And Paul says, I'm standing in front of you now. Why would I go and why would we go to Jerusalem and do this again? No. I'm standing in front of you now. Here I am. There you are. This isn't a teleconference. This isn't being done by video. Why are you asking me, am I willing to go to Jerusalem to stand and be judged before you? We're both standing here right now. Pronounce me innocent or guilty. If I am an offender or have committed anything deserving death, I don't object to dying. But if there's nothing in these things of which these men accuse me, no one can deliver me to them. Who do you think you are, sir? If I'm guilty, then sentence me. If I'm not guilty, why are you asking me if I want to go to Jerusalem? And finally, it ends with, I appeal to Caesar. I'm tired of messing with you. You're spineless. You're indicating that there's nothing that I've done nothing. I have not broken the laws of the Jews. I have not broken the laws of the temple. I have done nothing to offend Caesar. And so you want to send me to do this again in Jerusalem? Nope. Either convict me, I don't mind dying, or let me go. But if you won't do either one, I appeal to Caesar. Which takes us right back to what Jesus had told him. He winds up with Agrippa and with, interesting that they name Bernice. I'm not sure what the significance of that is. They don't often name, or don't always name the wife of the ruler.
Well, she wasn't actually the wife. She was his sister.
His sister.
Yeah. So right here, Agrippa, Herod Agrippa II, son of Herod Agrippa I, and great-grandson of Herod the Great, both of whose territories he ultimately ruled under Rome's jurisdiction. Bernice was his sister, with whom he was living incestuously.
As his wife.
Yeah.
It's a real sport, isn't he? Not altogether uncommon, though. I mean, it probably wasn't a scandalous thing in the day. Remember, John the Baptist wound up getting beheaded because Herod was his sister-in-law. Was Herodias his sister-in-law, his brother's wife?
His brother's wife.
Yeah.
And Brother J.D., what about
It says here too that excuse me, he said Paul was not required to defend himself before them since he had already appealed to Caesar, but he took the opportunity to witness to the Jewish king.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm saying. In the politics of it, the day before, the king comes in deference to the governor to pay his respects to him. He knows who the boss is.
Right.
But the next day you see it flip around where to sort of shift all of this over to the Jewish side, you see the king coming in, because the scripture says he came in with pomp and ceremony. He's clearly the king. He's wearing his royal robes. He sits on a throne. But then we see the governor, who's the real power, who sort of takes a lower level seat, as in a trial you might see a prosecuting attorney, the district attorney, who's presenting a case to the judge, when he's the one with the power. By the way, in the real world that we live in, that actually is pretty much the case. In a courtroom, the one with the real power, well, up to the point when it gets to the judge, up to that point, the real power in any district is the district attorney. Even in a court, when the district attorney says I've dropped the case, it's over with.
It's not going to.
You wind up with a dog fight. Then if a judge don't want to, we had a case with General Michael Flynn, who was that sort of thing is still playing out right now. Eventually, the prosecuting attorney, which is the Justice Department, drops the case, and the judge didn't want to let it be dropped. It's over with. If the prosecutor won't prosecute it, the judge can't adjudicate it. So even in this case, although he's taking a sort of a little bit of a political subservient role here, he's stepping back from being, the day before you come to pay respects to me, today I pay respects to you. Politicians then and now are the same thing. We'll pick it up at that point next week.